to our discussion about ranked choice voting. I'm Lily Blitzer, by the way, and I have to say that I heard somewhere that when you're nervous in speaking in front of people, that you should pretend that everybody's naked. So, you know what I'm thinking. In a few minutes, you'll meet our special guest, Adam Friedman, who will explain to you the details of how and why ranked choice voting is a viable and preferred system of voting. Our presentation is co-hosted by the League of Women Voters and our local chapter of Represent Us. I also would like to give a huge shout out to John Roberts Brakey over there from AUDIT Elections USA. John, we're lucky to have him here. He's making a video of this presentation. And more often than not, John is tirelessly flying around the country fighting deep-seated corruption in our electoral system. He has made it his personal goal to make elections transparent, trackable, and publicly verified. We're with you, John, and thank you for all that you do. I've been a volunteer with Represent Us for almost 2 years. I would like to speak to you briefly about our mission. We are a nonpartisan, anti-corruption, grassroots organization with 3 main goals. 1, we want to stop political bribery. So special interests cannot use job offers and donations to influence politicians and political candidates. Number 2, we want to end the secret and dark money that gets into the hands of political candidates. We cannot stop this, but we sure want to know who is buying political power. And 3, we want to fix our broken elections so the people, not the political establishment, are the ones in control. This sounds daunting, I know, although when you think about it, what choice do we have? If each of us puts in some effort, no matter how great or how small, if we choose just one thing that we're passionate about, if we can commit to give a small amount of time, we can help create change to a system that is not working optimally. The results could be huge. We as a country can do better, and we deserve better. There is so much corruption going on, it's mind-boggling. Some of us are to a point where we want to shut ourselves off from everything that's going on. I know there are days when I get up and I don't want to turn on the radio or the TV because I've had enough. And that would be fine not to pay attention if only the misconduct would go away on its own. But it won't. It continues and it festers. The corruption and abuses in our country have reached the breaking point. As citizens, we need to take matters into our own hands and tell those who run this country what we want. After all, we are paying their salaries, and it's time for them to listen to us. Those of us who are here are already inspired, or at least curious enough to learn about a system of voting that can have the outcome of our elections in Pima County and the rest of the country work in a way that makes us feel like our vote counts. We will be better served and represented when we get away from the duopoly that exists now. Choice, that is what we need in our elections. We need the freedom to decide who best represents our own personal values. We need to feel like our voice is heard, and these are the good reasons why we should support ranked choice voting. And I would like to, on the behalf of League of Women Voters, again, bring up Vivian Hart.
Thank you very much. The League of Women Voters has 3 main missions. The first is that we help people to vote. We register people to vote. We have a Get Out the Vote activity, mainly on the south part of town because that's where the percentage is the lowest of people voting, of registered voters actually voting. We also have brochures in the libraries that talk about how people can register to vote, the different ways to vote, and all answer mainly the questions about voting in Pima County. The second thing we do is we educate voters. We have 6 voter education programs every year: September, October, November, January, February, and March. And these are open to the public, and we have a retreat in May. And what we do is we pick the topics for those 6 programs based on what we think the issues of the day are. What issues does the public need to know more about? Are people really interested in? And so these are open to the public. We advertise them, and this is one way we educate voters about what is happening in our society. We also have a wonderful publication which is called A Citizen's Guide to Elected Officials. And this, we print thousands of these, and we put them out in libraries, in government offices. They're all over. The recorder's office asked me for 300 because it tells every single elected official on the city level, the county level, the state level, the federal level, and the tribe level. And their names, their contact information, and everything you know in order to be a smart citizen to contact the people who elect you. That's the third part that we do, which is we advocate. We advocate for our positions. Now, we don't just pull positions out of the air. We study them. Right now, we have a state study going on right now on gun safety. And they're going to take 2 years to study that particular topic in the state of Arizona before coming up with the language they're going to suggest that our state membership pass. So what we do is we have positions based on what we think will help our communities thrive, help American society thrive, help families, help individuals thrive. And based on those positions, we go to the state legislature. We have people observing the city council, the board of supervisors, Tucson Unified School District, and then working with our advocacy committee for us to advocate for our positions. So those are the 3 things that we do. Keep involved, because if you put your voice out and you tell your elected officials what you think, they're going to know that you're watching them, and that's important. Thank you.
I brought my little shirt along, Voter Choice Massachusetts, and asked me about ranked choice voting. I got this last year because I spend a lot of time in Boston and in Maine, and that's how I met Adam Friedman. Maine is the first state in the country, as you know, to have passed this. And when I met Adam through personal friends, right? But Adam was passionate about this subject, and he soon infected me. And he is the founder of Voter Choice Massachusetts. The nation's largest statewide movement to advance ranked choice voting. After Maine, and Maine was almost going to fail, and it was through Adam's efforts and Voter Choice Massachusetts that they saved Maine's after they tried to retract their vote. Sorry about that. And so thanks to Adam, he did that. And so he's a young man, but he's devoted a great portion of his life already to this cause. He's also a software engineer, and under the brand Severa, he created the first searchable public database of official election statistics on behalf of the Secretary of Massachusetts and 3 other U.S. states. He lives in Somerville, Massachusetts, and he holds a BA in history from Boston University. So I would now like to introduce Adam Friedman.
Okay. I'm not a big fan of podiums, so I'm going to move in front of this so I can actually see the slides. So there's a practical reason too, not just ideological. Okay. And I'm going to time myself. What I want to do, my goal here, there's a clicker here for me. Here it is. Oh, we're cool. Woo! Okay, yeah, I'm gonna use. Yeah, I'll use this mic. Don't worry. Okay. Okay, I need to access the back of that, guys. At one point, my stuff's in there. Yeah. Okay. So pardon me, I'm just getting out of a 2-day severe flu. I was in bed all day yesterday, so I'm gonna try to do my best. 70% back in action, and I'd like to know from you guys, I guess, asking the room, if you have no idea about ranked choice voting, haven't heard of it, you're here to really learn about ranked choice voting 101. Raise your hand. Okay, cool. And then if you know a little bit about it, but you know there's a lot more to learn, raise your hand. All right, and then if you're like super expert, you're ready to get going and organized to win ranked choice voting, raise your hand. Okay, cool. And those aren't mutually exclusive too. There's a lot of learning to do on your way. Okay, so I'm gonna try to do this talk in 20 minutes. Now, if there's a lot of questions while I do it, it's gonna be a little bit longer. There's a lot of information here, so I'm gonna move pretty quickly. But there's so much elegance and beauty to upgrading our voting system. There's so many facets of how to look at this that it's actually a really interesting exercise in envisioning how we can do democracy differently, how voters can behave differently, how incentives can change, how candidates can run campaigns differently. There's so many areas that ranked choice voting impacts. It seems like an actual simple change to the ballot, and this might be counterintuitive to some folks where like ranked choice voting sounds complicated. But I'm gonna start us off with a way to look at it really simply. So you can look at, so this is the one mistake that activists make a lot when they're trying to pitch ranked choice voting. I'll just get right to it. They immediately start talking about how you count a ranked choice voting election. They go into, well, you look to see which candidates have 50% of the vote. If no one has 50%, then you eliminate the lowest vote getter, and then you transfer those voters' votes to their next vote. That's like, whoa, there's a lot going on in there. And I tell people, I use the analogy of a car. If you're selling someone a car, do you open up the hood and show them the intricacies of the engine to get them into that car? No. You put them in the driver's seat and you have them drive the car and operate the interface. So with ranked choice voting, the best way to start to explore it, I think, is by looking at a ranked choice voting ballot. And so I'm going to show you this here, and I'll pass them out in a minute. But what I've done is I've actually folded the ranked choice voting ballot, which is a grid of bubbles, so that it looks like our usual pick one ballot. Can you kind of see that from where you're standing? Kind of? Yeah, those in the back. All right, let me pass this out. I'm going to pass this out. Can I get 2 helpers? So it's not one for, it's like every 2 people probably we have enough for. Ranked choice voting is merely an addendum to the existing ballot that we already know. It's an addendum. It's an add-on. So right now, the way we vote is we just pick one. And with ranked choice voting, you have the power to pick more than one candidate on your ballot. You rank them in the order that you prefer them. First choice, second choice, third choice, and so on. Now, you're not forced to rank all the candidates. You can just pick one. You can fold that ballot and you have your old-fashioned plurality system ballot back in your hand. If you've been used to voting the same way for 30 years, you can continue to do that. Ranked choice voting just gives you an added liberty, an added level of expression. You just unfold that along that first column and you step into the 21st century. And you have the power of backup choices. So if your favorite can't win, your vote instantly counts to your next available backup. And it makes sure that you can never waste your vote, and it makes sure that your vote is always in play no matter who you want to vote for, whether they're a front runner or they're not a front runner. Does that make sense? Does that sound pretty straightforward from the voter's perspective? That's how straightforward ranked choice voting actually is. The counting is equivalent to a runoff process, but it's done in a smarter way. So raise your hand if you're familiar with runoffs. Like the 2-round runoff. Everybody runs in 1 round, and then you pick the top 2 to run head-to-head in the 2nd round. Same thing with ranked choice voting, but you just do it in a single election, and you save the jurisdiction a lot of money because you're not running 2 elections and dragging out all the voting machines, and then forcing voters to turn out again, which is usually anemic turnout. So you get higher turnout, and you save taxpayer money, and everybody gets the power of ranking backup choices, and you have a majority winner at the end of that election. Make sense?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, water. All right, see, we're 5 minutes in. You see how fast time flies? So let's just quickly run through the problems that we're looking at. Familiar with this race? Quintessential spoiler dilemma. Quote-unquote spoiler candidate. Bush and Gore were a hair's breadth away from 50%. They neither had 50%, and then you had Ralph Nader, the Green Party candidate in Florida, enter the race, and he had nearly 100,000 votes. He eclipsed by factors the difference between the front runners. And Nader used to be a consumer rights hero. He used to be a very well-respected political figure nationally, but after this election, he was demonized. You're an egotist, you should have dropped out, you're a spoiler, how dare you, flip the results, and that's exactly what happened. And we know that with exit polls, most of Nader voters would have preferred Gore. It was like he's left of left. And Gore would have consolidated that majority, and a majority of voters wanted that combination. But simply because a third candidate entered the race, our current first-past-the-post plurality voting system, our pick-one system, broke down. Broke down. It had the opposite of its intended result for representation in a democracy. We got the opposite result, flipped the result. That's a paradox. And then you have crowded field scenarios where I haven't done the research to say there were legitimate spoilers, and I want this group to help, as you guys get into this issue, to do some of this research to find the specific Arizona cases where you have it. But we do know that we don't have a clear sense of these winners in both these are 2 Republican primaries for Congress, one in 2016 and one in the same year in a different district, House 5 and 1. You had people were winning these with 30% of the vote, which means what percentage of voters did not choose the winners?
70%.
About 70%. Yet they go on to run for the general and eventually, in some cases, get the seat and then govern 100% of the district. That's kind of paradoxical, isn't it? This was an interesting case. Sinema, McSally, and Green. Green was a very fraught candidate, and there were a lot of people wringing their hands about her. She was actually Green Party, it was Democrat, Republican, and Green Party in the race, and people were worried that she'd siphon off votes from the Democrat and flip the results. And she dropped out at the very last minute, and unfortunately it didn't happen. There was enough, she went on to endorse the Democrat, and she could reconsolidate most of those votes, but she did pull about 3%. And that race was, I think, within 1 or 2 points. So if she was a little bit stronger, that would have flipped the result to Republican. This is the vulnerability. Well, right, and then that's a whole other problem. This is the vulnerability of our system. Oh, sorry, there's our close race. And no majority, technically. And then in Phoenix, this is in our cities, we have these runoff processes. So it's a free-for-all in the first round. If no one gets a majority, then they run a second election, top 2. And this is what we had here, very split field. No one got that majority, so they had the 2 go head-to-head. But now they do an election in November, then another top 2 in March, So that's many months later. So the campaign season's just dragging on and on. You got to spend a lot of money to compete as a candidate. So that creates an obstruction for fresh voices. And then voters, they saw a $1 million expense for that second election, and then a 25% voter turnout for the top two round, half of who came out in the first round. So 25% of registered voters are choosing the governance structure, the mayor for the city. And this is the dirtiest aspect of the way we do our elections now. And if you do it the right way, it's actually legal. This was the case in 2010 that Republican operatives were recruiting homeless people to run as Green Party candidates in order to nadir those elections, to play spoiler and intentionally siphon off votes from their Democratic opponent. Stooge candidates. And it's just out there. It's just, our system is just littered with these vulnerabilities. And with ranked choice voting now, when you vote for a Green Party, when you vote for a Libertarian, when you vote for an independent, you're not throwing your vote away, and you're certainly not giving the election over to your strongest opponent by flipping the results. You have backup choices. So if that relatively minor candidate can't win, your vote will transfer to your next ranking. And so your vote always stays in play, and every voter has a voice in the election and is actually heard, has full expression. And a ballot that has rankings, you could also argue from a philosophical standpoint, is a more accurate reflection of how we see the world. We don't go around and we say, I only want this one cereal, and that's my tribe, my Cheerios, that's it. You compare different, I'm not going to have a lot of sugar this week. I'm now diabetic because I eat Fruit Loops or whatever. And you can put those on your ballot just as you see the world. So the way we think about candidates, same thing. This is a really fun example in Massachusetts. Fun as in horrific, because this guy was indicted on felony charges of investment fraud in this little working class city of Fall River, south of where I live in Somerville. And so there was a recall petition, and 2-1, voters said, this guy's got to go. And in a quirk of the charter of Fall River, he was able to run again for the replacement election for his seat. He could be one of the candidates. No, but I mean, it shouldn't, the voters have spoken, right? Like they definitely don't want him. So he's not going to win that election, is he? Oh. But he had not one challenger, not two, not three, but four. And so that 61% was all split up among candidates who said, we got to get rid of this corruption. And so this introduces another interesting paradox into our system. I call it a plurality voting paradox, which is the more popular a position or platform or ideology is, it follows, in theory, that there's going to be more candidates to run to represent that view. And then that very popularity, that very high number of candidates, is the very undoing of that platform, because they all fatally split up the vote and you get these strange outlier effects. So he walked back into his seat. Not proud of that. Not a proud Massachusetts moment. All right, so there's lots of examples that we could go through. Navigating this crowded Republican field in 2016 for the presidential primary, Trump was able to garner a wedge of support in those early primaries between 25 and 35% of the vote, because there's so many other choices, even if the majority didn't prefer him. That allowed that. Without ranked choice voting, that's the kind of result you can get. A strong tribal contingent can take over and win, even if the majority opposes them. Now, this is a little outdated, because a lot of folks have dropped out, but it's still contentious. You have Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders vying for the kind of progressive mantle with ranked choice voting. Democratic primary voters coming up have the power to rank both of them on their ballot if they want to. And in fact, there's 5 states that have rolled this out for this upcoming presidential primary. They're using ranked choice voting in that. How does that sound to people? Is that a good idea? Yes. Yeah. Right on. All right, so this happens. So some people are like, well, look, most elections aren't very competitive. So is this really going to change that much? And they're right. In absolute terms, there's a lot of one and two person races, one-person races. Not really a race. They just walk back in. But one thing, ranked choice voting incentivizes more people to run because they can never be blamed as a spoiler. So it brings more competition. The other thing, I see it as insurance. You don't need it until you do. Until something happens, like a Nader situation. Then you wish you had it. And so you want it available in those cases where elections get really heated and competitive. And these are the rates, when you count 3+ candidate races in Massachusetts, these are the rates at which people are winning without a majority. Arizona, you guys need to do a lot of research to get this data and put this together, but this would be a handy way for people to see this as a systemic problem going back many years. So we have the problems in the plurality voting system. I explained ranked choice voting. You see the ballot. We want to talk about how it's counted? Yes. How we get the winning result? Okay, let's do this. Now, the key with ranked choice voting, it's not a scoring system. It's not a rating system. There's different kinds of alternative voting systems that do that. As I said before, this is a runoff system. And so the winner has to have 50%. And you only count the first choice votes first. When you start a ranked choice voting tabulation, you count only those first choice bubbles on everyone's ballots. And if any candidate has more than 50% of first choices, they're declared the winner, and you're done. So you actually didn't need to use the rankings in that case. Ranked choice voting comes into play when there's a complex split field here, and there may have been a latent majority desire that was fragmented because there were too many candidates to represent that view among the electorate. And so now we have no one getting a majority of first choice votes. So all we do a smart instant runoff. This all happens in microseconds with an Excel formula. You could write this in 20 minutes. A high schooler could write it in 20 minutes. You eliminate the lowest vote getter. Those voters, their choice now moves to their next ranking. So their vote is always in play. So if we have strong orange, weak orange, strong purple, weak purple. If I voted for weak purple first, no one got a majority, you eliminate weak orange. And most of those voters, I'm in the 4%, I voted strong orange as my second choice. So now, in the second round of the instant runoff, those voters have their second ranking activated. And you see 1% of them, or 20% of the 5%, the 1% share, wanted strong purple. So they picked up a few more votes. So the remaining candidates pick up those next rankings. And you continually simply eliminate and reallocate until you get your majority winner. So in this first round, do we have a majority winner in the second round? No. So what do we do? That's right. And so in this example, just for the purposes of this example, these are really, really staunch purple voters. And so the vast majority of them wanted strong purple as their next choice. Did anyone hit the majority threshold now? On the bottom, third round, 55%. Yes. So notice, if we had an old school pick one plurality election, who would win? Orange. Strong orange. But what is the true sentiment of the electorate? And you can see it reconsolidate. Rather than vote splitting, you have vote reconsolidation. And it's honoring the actual will of the jurisdiction. Any questions about this part?
Yeah, I'm not really clear how the votes roll over. Yeah.
Okay. So in this, lady said, I'm not really clear how the votes roll over between rounds. Yes. So you remember we start by only counting voters' first choices. Right. Okay. And then we eliminate that portion of the first choices that picked weak orange as their first choice. And those voters' ballots, instead of their vote being thrown away, now we move to we count their second ranking. Everyone else remains on their first ranking because their candidate's still in the race. So there's no way we could count other rankings on those ballots because that would violate one person, one vote. You only have one person, one vote, and you have your active vote and then stored preferences if you need those preferences on your ballot. Does that make sense? And so these folks now, their second choices were strong orange and strong purple. And then we do the same here. So this 20% were the first choices of those who did light purple, 20%. And then that reallocated, yeah, to their second rank.
If you just wanted to vote, say, 3, and the others you didn't even want to give a vote to, is that better than ranking 4 and 5?
Yeah, that's a good question. You are free to vote as few as you want, to rank as few as you want. So if you only want to rank 1, like as I showed you earlier when I folded the ballot, you can do that. But as a voter, it's in your interest to rank as many as you can, or as many as you like. Because in case your higher rankings are eliminated in the runoff, if they're too weak and they can't win, then your vote your ballot will still count for something. If every voter ranked every candidate with ranked choice voting, then every single voter would either be picking the winner or their strongest opponent at the end, mathematically. Which means you have much more enfranchisement. In terms of the psychology of the voter, they know their vote's going to count for at least the winner or the next best. They didn't quite get 50, but they were close.
I appreciate
Oh, microphone.
I appreciate that you're a software analyst, and my question would be, as you put this in place, you're making a program a lot more complicated. And having a little bit of programming in my background, I know the more complicated the program, the easier it is to hack. And I'd also wonder if it's ever necessary for a recount, or how do you check it?
So when we talk about something being complicated, we have to define, that's a pretty open-ended definition. I would argue that if you make any change to our current system, our current voting system, by definition, it's going to make it more complicated because we probably have the simplest, most primitive voting system one could design. You think about it. It's like rocks in a bowl, right? It's like this, I call it caveman voting, whatever, just to be funny about it. And so that argument can be trotted out for any change to the system. We all know what our society and our economy and our politics are capable of. We've put people on the moon. Our banking system, from the technology standpoint, is generally sound. I think we can handle creating a runoff system and using some digital technology, as long as the answer to that problem, and it is a problem, making sure elections can be secure and auditable, is the ability to make it transparent and auditable from an independent third party. Not a third party like political party, but a third party entity like an academic working group and whatnot. And that is a problem whether we have plurality voting or ranked choice voting, and it needs to happen.
If I could just say something, not a question. I'm a specialist on voting equipment and understanding it. I was against ranked choice voting in the beginning because of the old systems, because the old system was marked sense technology. It left no evidence behind. Marked sense is a light coming down on the ballot, and if it's a dark spot, it got absorbed. No evidence left behind. 80% of the country since 2004, most recently in the last 3 years, has changed to digital platforms. I want you to know these new machines, they don't count the ballot. They count the picture that it made. That picture is a public record. Now, I'm from Maine. I was very concerned. I went up to Maine, met with the Secretary of State, had meetings, and agreed to all the images. And then I watched the whole recount being done. And the next rate, they used images. And then they could take that round and say, whoop, there it is, ready to audit.
Right.
Now we're going to go round 2. Again, use the images. There
Right.
you go. You can track
And
it.
if-
And a person can pull up a precinct and analyze each
Right.
round to make sure it's real.
Right.
Because truly, our country needs elections that are transparent,
Yeah.
trackable, and publicly verified. And I want you to know, just recently, Arizona turned 100% digital. And
All right.
we've had previous cases. We're getting ready to meet with the Secretary of State again. But thank you.
John, can you announce your website so people can sign up and join with you for that?
Okay, well, it's pretty easy. It's Audit Elections USA, but we're forming a new group called Election Scrutineers. We want you
Scrutineers.
to be a scrutineer.
Just like the Musketeers.
Yeah, well, it's a term that we found out of Australia or other countries.
That's cool.
That they say, hey, this is a bad election. Let's get the scrutineers in here. And that's who we are. We
Thank you.
scrutinize elections.
Thank you, John. Fantastic. John Brakey. All right, let's keep this moving. Negative campaigning. So our current system incentivizes candidates to go negative. We've all experienced it. We're all sick and tired of it. Studies have shown in ranked choice voting cities that candidates actually stick to the issues. And it's because of the natural incentives that are baked in to running under a ranked ballot. In our current system, if I'm knocking on doors and I support the purple candidate, and I come to a house with an orange candidate sign in the yard, what do? Our current system. Leave them. I'm out. Oh, all right. But under ranked choice voting, I go to the door and I have a conversation with that voter. And I say, look, I know, sir or ma'am, I know you're supporting orange candidate as your first choice. I'm supporting purple. And in fact, you have a few things in common with purple candidate. I'd love to earn your second preference on your ranked ballot. Now, the one thing I'm definitely not going to do is mudsling against their favorite. That would be poor strategy, poor campaign strategy. So it creates a natural incentive for candidates to find common ground with as many voters as possible, because at the end of the day, they got to be somewhere on a majority of voters' ballots. So they got to find something constructive to bring the community together. Which sounds a bit like governing, doesn't it? Shouldn't campaigns better reflect what governing is like rather than the fundraising, the money chase, the slash and burn, politics of division, the tribalism, all of that? So this is one note of elegance that I find in ranked choice voting. I hope that you explore this further. People worry, it's so complicated. Are voters not showing up at the polls when you establish ranked choice voting? It's not the case. A huge comprehensive study of hundreds of elections that was recently done shows that there's actually, not only is there no change in turnout for a general election, but you actually have a 10-point increase when you compare this to the runoff process. That's a big deal. That's not a 10% increase, that's a 10-point increase. So instead of 35% of the vote, 45% voter turnout. And then there's no change in error rates. People are going to screw it up because it's so complicated and Americans can't count 1, 2, 3. So they're going to screw it up. No, it's not. It's a myth. It's fine. People can. They understand the idea of backup choices and preferences. And these are my favorite numbers. We can argue back and forth about the theory of if it's too complicated or voters are overwhelmed, very cynical lines of thinking, or we can look at the data. Look at where voters actually use it. Maine's first ever primary, statewide, Democratic side, nearly 90% of voters used the rankings. First time. And in fact, in Maine, the Secretary of Maine predicted that only half of the voters would use the rankings. So he was dead wrong. And in Santa Fe, again, nearly 90% of voters used the rankings, and this is my all-time favorite statistic. Their first ever mayoral, 5 candidates, 61% of voters ranked all 5 choices, which introduces a brand new concept of ranked choice voting incentivizing voters to engage more deeply, to do more homework, to feel more connected to the full palette of possibilities and ideas and candidates that run. Because now they have something to say about everyone. They can express themselves on the ballot. There's evidence to show that ranked choice voting not only is correlating, but causing increases in women and people of color to actually run and win office. This is a correlative study where you have changes in city council representation in Bay Area cities that have adopted ranked choice voting, and this is causal. This is called a differences in difference study, where you control for all these other variables that impact the likelihood of candidates to run and to win and their demographic properties. And you find that the cities that adopt ranked choice voting have more people of color running and women of color running and winning. And so we've got all these great positive points on it. Okay, we know about Maine. Maine is the first state to adopt and use it statewide for live political elections. And at the heels of Maine is where I got started. I called a meeting in Boston, and I had a big turnout just to run it in Massachusetts. But before we could even get to our finish line, last year, New York City just enacted ranked choice voting for local elections with 74% of the vote. Very promising. And it's actually, this is another thing people say, they're like, well, ranked choice voting is used in a few cities around the country. There's more to this story. Ranked choice voting has been used or enacted in some form, up or down the ticket, in 25 states. It's actually on the ground pretty significantly. It's just not used in high-profile federal and state offices just yet. Although now with the presidential primary, we have Wyoming, Alaska, Hawaii, and Nebraska. No, Kansas. Thank you. Are using it for their presidential primary for the Dem side, as I mentioned earlier. Pretty cool. So we're making some progress there. It's been used for over 100 years in Australia for national elections in Australia. It's used for an indirect vote for president. The Indian Congress uses it to elect the president of India. And Ireland also, about 100 years. And various UK, Commonwealth countries. So it's not a brand new idea. It's been around for some time. And in lots of colleges, universities, and professional organizations. All right, so there's lots of cool stuff in Massachusetts I don't have to get into, but the quick and dirty is we went from no list, no money, no incorporation. We're nearly 50,000 people strong, over 7,000 volunteer signups. We've raised tremendous amounts of money, which I didn't put here, but we've raised a lot of money so that we could hire professional staff to qualify, help with the volunteers, qualify for the ballot and run this for November 2020. We have qualified for the ballot there, and it's a really exciting time in Massachusetts. And we've got a lot of endorsements and things that have come from that. All right, so that's basically it. I'd love to take more questions, and then I want to see about if you guys want to actually get started with some actions today. But let's do some questions first. Okay, lady back there first, and then this gentleman.
I have a question. I have to follow a lot of the campaigns. I'm a political blogger in town. And when there's a campaign with 6 people, there's a lot of people to follow. Wouldn't it be easier for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party to vet the candidates and whittle down the group running to like 3? Lot more money would be spent, wouldn't have to be spent in the campaigns, and then we wouldn't have to have so much of this ranked choice voting.
It'd be more efficient.
Yeah.
Kind of like a totalitarian dictatorship would be more efficient than a representative democracy. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, so I mean, if we want, it depends. I mean, we want more power. The voters, a lot of folks in this room, I think, would agree more direct democracy is usually better. So we want to include those party voters to make that decision for themselves, rather than backroom deals. Yes, sir. He had his hand up next, yeah. Oh yeah, wait for the mic.
What has been the support or resistance to our established political parties, Democrats, Republicans? Are they supporting or not supporting, or is it not uniform across the nation?
There's a few ways to, there's so many, ranked choice voting is very interesting. A lot of people kind of see what they want to see in it, but as an activist, as an advocate for it, you can help people see how it benefits them. So Utah actually passed, is one of the rare states that have passed ranked choice voting at the state level, but they passed it to begin a city-based pilot program for their cities. So a couple of cities in Utah are now trying it out. Utah is a red state. And Utah has libertarians and independent Tea Party folks that run against Republicans and spoil elections. So it helps in those jurisdictions to maintain kind of right-wing majorities so they don't get split up. And obviously in more liberal areas, it's going to help on the left. It's going to help if those jurisdictions are majority left. Ranked choice voting will preserve that by immunizing this from the spoiler problem. So it really depends on the particularities of the states. One unfortunate result of Maine, and I had some slides on this, but Maine had a congressional Republican incumbent in their northern rural district under ranked choice voting and a Democratic challenger. They both got like 47, 48% of the vote, and there were 2 independents that ran and polled 7 or 8% of the vote. And the Republican incumbent got the most first choice votes. But once you eliminated the independents, because no one had a majority, most of them went to the Blues, to the Democrat. And he got over 50% and won. And so the Republican Party in Maine have kind of turned it into a political football. They're like, this is liberals trying to game the elections because look at this example. But it just so happened that most voters did actually lean left, and it just didn't go in their favor. So the optics of that kind of comes up quite a bit. That helped us in Massachusetts because it's a heavily Democratic state. So that was actually good for us, but it's bad in the long term because ranked choice voting is truly a nonpartisan issue. It really just is a better way to reflect the district. So one way to, I hope I'm kind of getting at your question. So there's all sorts of factors that kind of factor into major parties being for or against this. Major parties are not against this by default. A lot of people come into this space because they want to empower third parties and independents, which ranked choice voting certainly does. But it can help crowded field primaries to make sure that they get their strongest candidate to do battle in the general against their major party opponent. So that's good for the major parties to make sure they get a majority supported candidate for those cases. So you can frame it that way for them. You can say this helps. It also helps incumbents if you can say to an incumbent, you shouldn't be afraid of this. If you're in your office because you know that you're very popular, then people are going to rank you somewhere on the ballot, and now you'll have a majority proof that you're liked. You'll have a majority mandate rather than this piddly 35% where you have to feel a little bit insecure, like, did I only win this because of a fluke of our voting system? So it gives them more confidence in the office. Yes.
So what about, I'll project, what about money? I'm really concerned with Citizens United.
Oh yeah.
So how does this, how do people who don't have a lot of money, who, like we recently in Tucson, we had an election, and I think it was a Green Party guy, well, he didn't have no money, and that was the end of that. But he was still, out there on the ballot from there. So what happens in those situations with money and this?
The beauty of the system is that it decouples, it unhinges this viability factor from the calculus of the voter when they're figuring out who to vote for. Like right now, because you only have that one shot as a voter, you have one vote. So instead of just voting your heart and saying, I love this person's platform, who they are, their story, what they stand for, now I've got to think about, are they within striking distance of winning? Did they raise the most money? Do they have the most endorsements? Is the media showing, support for them? Are they polling better? All this other stuff that has really nothing to do with the political philosophy and platform between you and that candidate. But with ranked choice, you can actually vote for who you want to because you always have backup choices. And so for a Green Party or a candidate that's not well resourced, they might knock on a door and a voter's like, I'm all for changing over out of a fossil fuel economy into renewable energy economy. I love it. That might even have solar panels on my house as we're talking. But I'm also practical, and there's no way in hell I'm throwing my vote away on you. And that's really tragic. And so it keeps all these minor parties and candidates in a death spiral where they never cross the threshold of legitimacy. But with ranked choice, now voters can vote for them. We'll begin to reverse that into a cycle of legitimacy. Next election, now that voters need time to get used to that power because we're so habituated to demonizing and avoiding all of these. We see them as fringy, blah, 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 which is ironic because all of these ideas start there, and then now you have all the major Democratic candidates talking about universal health care and climate change and 100% renewable. Like this stuff was all in the Green Party platform 20, 30 years ago, right?
I
I don't really have a question. I just want to express a thought, if I may. First of all, because I'm so sensitive to both these organizations being nonpartisan, and I am quintessential nonpartisan at this point because I'm homeless. I don't feel that I relate to either of the major two parties. I feel that I have registered independent. So when you mention the thing about, first of all, the Republicans enlisted the homeless man on the street to run as agreeing to be a vote splitter. I know you and I have talked, and you've mentioned to me that the Dems have done the same thing.
Yes.
The other point is when we did the Nader thing, we know that Ross Perot split the vote with the Republican candidate, and that's how President Clinton got in. So this happens on both sides, not just on one side. And again, I guess what motivates me to get involved in this is because I am independent and I feel homeless in that sense, and I want to see more choices. If there's an independent person, fine. If in this case some kind of person who I can relate to in any party, I will vote for them as my first, second, or third choice. So that's where I am, and I think that we independents are a real growing number of people in this country. Everybody I speak to sort of shares my feelings. That's it.
Thank you for your comments. Yeah.
Thank you.
So can ranked choice voting also be combined with an open primary, as she was saying, with the nonpartisan?
You mean the blanket primary where everyone runs in one election? Is that what you mean? Like multiple members of multiple parties run in one, like also known as the jungle primary, blanket primary, top two system. Is that what you're referring to?
I might need that explained better to know for sure.
Okay.
I just mean open primaries in the sense that it's not a partisan primary.
Yeah, we're talking about the same thing.
Okay.
In fact, you better use ranked choice voting or else you're going to have rampant vote splitting.
Right.
So again, once you introduce a whole free-for-all of candidates, you're going to have people, folks on the left can game the system by planting a bunch of Tea Party people on the right. They all pull votes away from the strongest Republican. Absolutely, you could do a lot of damage that way. So yeah.
If we're pushing for passing ranked choice voting in Arizona, can we combine that with an open primary system?
Yes.
In our legislation that we're trying to
I believe so. I'm not an expert on Arizona law. So let's maybe take a few minutes break and then move into organizing. Raise your hand if you want to win ranked choice voting in Arizona on some level. Okay, cool. So we're all on the same page there. Okay. I think it's time to really think about what it takes to do that. So we could do a break, or we could keep move into that phase of the conversation. I'd like to get people in the other room to do some breakout groups and things. So raise your hand if you'd rather stay here and just talk about the strategy here, versus doing a 3-minute break, get some food, and then move over to the other room. So raise your hand if you want to stay here and just you're comfortable, etc. Raise your hand if you want to take a break and move. That was like a split. That was a really split vote. Do it again. Raise your hand if you want to stay here. Raise your hand high.
3-minute then vote.
Raise your hand if you want to take. Okay, yeah. Raise your hand if you want to do some breakout groups in the other room and move around a little. Still like half and half. This guy did 2 arms. He's stuffing the ballot box.
Just a 3-minute break.
Yeah. Let's just take a break. We'll take a break. We'll deliberate like jurors. All right.
Pick your favorite color.
The ranked choice voting way.
Instead of voting for just one color, you get to rank your top 3.
Well, purple is the best, but if I can't have purple, I want blue. And if neither of those wins, I guess I can live with orange.
Now, let's count up everybody's votes.
Under ranked choice voting rules, it's not enough just to get the most votes. You need a majority.
More than 50% of the votes.
Purple's ahead, but it has only 7 votes.
It needs at least 11 to win.
So we eliminate the color in last place.
Sorry, Orange fans, we're going to your second choice.
2 more for green,
1 for purple.
but no color has 11 votes yet.
Still no majority.
Bye-bye,
blue.
1 more for purple,
4 for green.
and we have a winner.
The ranked choice voting way.